Hey everybody, welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight we are going to be talking about Kanye West, Matt Chandler, Elon Musk. There's a lot of topics. That we're going to talk about tonight. We'll see how it goes. In case this is your first time listening to the Tuesday night live stream, there's usually no real distinguishing direction. It's just free-flowing conversation. So let's go ahead and get into it. Welcome again to Matt and Josh. Back again on a Tuesday night live stream, guys. How are you doing? Good? You doing good?
I'm pretty grand.
It's been a while
How are you, man?
since I've been here on a Tuesday night.
Well, you were here last Tuesday night.
You were here last week, right?
You were the bottom.
Yeah,
you were the
I
bottom.
two guys, Jason and Kiefer.
Yeah, Kiefer last week.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that was just so long ago.
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah, the
whole
whole 7 days.
I get it. It's the highlight of your week. Everything else was boring in your week, and then you were just like, it was just a whirlwind, is what it was. It was a whirlwind.
This is the highlight of my week. It is a good time.
Oh no, I enjoyed it a lot. I carve out of my schedule time to talk to you guys. So tonight, this should be very interesting. So we're going to talk, there's no time limit. We might not even get to all of these subjects, but we're on the clickbaity thumbnail that we have, Kanye West, Matt Chandler, Elon Musk. I've kind of rated them in the level of that I've seen them on the internet, right? The sort of the wordage that's happened on the internet. And we have okay, just to get this out of the way, it wasn't just a clickbaity title. We've received DMs on all of these subjects. So we've received DMs about, hey, what do you think about Kanye West and his whole thing? And by the way, I'm going to call him Kanye West and not Ye because that's how it processes in my brain. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. And then I've also received some messages about Matt Chandler and the whole thing going on at the Village Church, and then some about Elon and Twitter, but not as much. So that being said, we'll enter into the Kanye West thing. Now, I'm not going to assume that you guys know all of it. Do you have an idea of what's going on with Kanye West, the podcast, all that stuff? You do, Josh?
An idea, yeah.
Okay, so Matt's all right, so in case you're in the same boat as Matt, right? So to back us up a little bit, obviously Kanye West, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago, came out with the album, said he had converted to Christianity. It wasn't too long ago. Yeah. And then he did the whole Sunday services thing. I think the pandemic kind of shut that down a little bit. And then now he's reemerged, saying some things with some guy named Nick Fuentes, which, as far as I can tell, not a great influence on him from what little research I've done. So Kanye's been on a couple podcasts, right? And the reason this is relevant to what we talk about is because Kanye is out there. For example, I know he was on the Alex Jones podcast, and he had a Bible in front of him, and he was saying some stuff about some things about the Nazis and the Jews and things like that. And basically the questions that we have coming, right? So that being said, right, how do we as Christians then, right, process this as somebody that's out there declaring themselves to be a follower of Jesus, having a Bible in front of them, and then saying things like, so for example, in case you haven't seen the clip, I think Alex Jones asked him about Hitler, and he said he was kind of a fan of Hitler. Hitler wasn't too terrible. This is basically what he said. I can't remember the exact quote, but let's put it this way. Alex Jones, the clip I did see, he was like, what? And so he out Alex Jones. Like he made Alex Jones uncomfortable, which has got to be hard to do. And so the question then comes up, at least the couple that I've seen, is then like, how do we as Christians then process, I'm going to take this earbud out because it's driving me nuts. How do we as Christians then process the reality that Kanye's out here saying he's a Christian, but acting in some sort of way that's clearly contradictory as far as, what he's saying and some of the things he's leaning towards that's kind of obviously contradictory to the scripture. Now, in a very much more general way, and I think this can apply a lot more practically to people generally, like there's people probably in our lives we know that haven't gone full Kanye, but are like act and say certain things that are maybe contradictory to the Bible. So the question, like, to kind of get this discussion started then, is like, all right, well, how do we as Christians approach that, right? Because if there's people, I mean, I think the most like line correlative sort of thing we could draw is, you're at a Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner and your uncle or aunt says something like, how do those conversations get entered into as believers in a faithful way, to people that do declare themselves to be believers. And I mean, let's just say they are, but they're acting and speaking in such a way that's, not lining up with Scripture. First of all, I think the question I might maybe be, have you ran into that before? And if so, how did you deal with it? Maybe you haven't.
Sure. So I have, I was just at my aunt and uncle's place down in North Carolina fishing a few weeks back. And right in the kitchen, they have a sign that says, it's kind of like the classic live, laugh, love type thing. But instead it says, I love Jesus, but I also cuss a little type mentality, right? And that fits them very much. And so in my mind, there's always this thought of, they claim Christ, they claim to be Christians, but they don't necessarily espouse all of the same views that I do, or use all the same exact language that I do. And where do we draw the line between cussing a little and deciding that someone's not a believer? And I don't know that I have the best answer for that, or an answer. It's kind of a moving target for me. I think that they're saved, and I don't think that that's just hopeful optimism on my part. But I don't think they've ever been a part of that good of a church, or have attended as regularly as they should, or they've never been discipled by anybody, right? And so you have some people making their way through the world, saying they love Jesus, going to church once in a while, maybe reading the Bible once in a while, listening to Caleb nonstop. That actually might be a hindrance. And you land with a sign on the wall that says, we love Jesus, and we cuss a little, right? My uncle cusses a lot. But something that stuck out to me with him was interesting, right? So he's one of the roughest, toughest guys that I know. The line for him is he won't say and he won't tolerate anyone taking the Lord's name in vain. And it's not some sort of legalism for him either. He takes it very, very personally, because Christ is his savior. So I don't know. That's a tough one. Now I don't know. I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, but I think it's sometimes hard to just say and declare, well, they must not be a believer because he drops F-bombs every other word. It's not ideal, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah,
I'm gonna stop now because I feel like I'm rambling.
No, you're good. So I got a couple things, but Matt, what's your kind of take on that? I mean, not necessarily Kanye specifically, but obviously that's some sort of thought process.
Yeah, well, I think on Kanye specifically, I think that we're going to run into problems like this in celebrity culture at any point when we start seeing these celebrities as synonymous with our Christian representation in wider culture, because that I mean that's a cult of celebrity is dangerous even within the church itself. Someone who may not be popular, maybe just be popular within our local church in particular. And when we put the focus on them and we put the standard on their shoulders, that can get out of hand really quickly. And the problem just becomes exponentially messier the larger the circle of influence that this celebrity is in. And so I would definitely say that Kanye is definitely up there. I would also say that a lot of people in the wider culture probably understand, or I would hope that they understand, that Kanye has not necessarily been in this thing for a very long time, and he was essentially doing and saying really weird stuff before his conversion experience. And so I think some of this is just a matter of like just who Kanye is to a certain extent. Not to excuse it in any way, but just to
Right.
just to answer like, why is it this way? Why is it happening? As far as seeing this in the lives of others, I mean, for me, it's just a matter of the process of sanctification, I guess the type or the level or the condition of someone's own personal conscience. And I know that we've had discussions about that, but in particular in past lives, in terms of like, the difference between legalism and freedom in the Lord. And so, we show the truth in love, and we show the truth by example. But I do think that there are situations and contexts in which we should speak up and try to address certain things in a matter of love, but it has to be the right time and the right place, and it has to be approached in the right way. And I think that a situation, it's the perfect situation. If you see a problem like that and you are attempting to lead and live a more wholesome, more dependable example in front of them, and as the Holy Spirit performs his work, and they maybe come to you and say, hey, what do you think about this? The field is ripe at that point for sowing those seeds. And then on the same hand, if you see them continuing down a path that is going to lead to imminent destruction, then you would definitely need to jump out in the way of the cart and and try to stop that and prevent that in any way that you can.
Yeah.
Within reason.
And I think what you said at the beginning was really good. Like, this idea of sanctification plays a part for sure. I mean, we have this idea. Like, I remember even whenever I think Judah Smith was hanging around with like Justin Bieber, the whole idea of like, oh, look, Justin's saved, and look, and he's singing these religious songs or whatever, and then he's still doing certain things. And I think there is there's this reality that sanctification is a real thing, and oftentimes, depending upon where you're at, who you're around. This is the whole thing where I said, like, that whole hanging out with Nick Fuentes and whoever this Milo person is maybe isn't the best people to be around to walk you through or be in your own little Bible study, right? Like, this idea is that you want to be careful about who's around you, who's influencing you. That was a big concern. I know when Kanye first, declared he was a Christian and had converted, like, everybody was asking, all right, well, who's around you then? Who's influencing you? Who's discipling you? What church are you going to?
Right.
And everybody was pretty disappointed, or lots of people were disappointed when he showed up at Lakewood Church, and they're like, crap. And the whole process of sanctification is incredibly messy, and I think lots of times, again, depending on where you're at in the United States, who's around you, there's this assumption by some people that that's just like, oh, you're saved, so now like the work's done. Like, it's not, like, you just should be a certain way. And like you said, Matt, like, he was already different. Like, he already obviously operates on a different level already, whether that be some sort of mental thing or just just some sort of just an artistic sort of thing that he's doing. So on that level, like, you kind of have to go, okay, well, is he like just a really extreme artist and that's how he processes things, or is there really a mental thing here? It just seems like, watching some of the stuff, at least the clips that have come out, like, it seems to me that he really does want, like, he talks about Jesus a lot. He does call out like a bunch of like between the whole Nazi stuff, there's some coherent thoughts about sin and holiness that do come out. So it's just confusing about, like, where are some of these things coming from? Like, who's around you, who's influencing you? I think that's a huge part of it. Like you said, Josh, like, the whole thing is like, you're a believer, but have you been discipled at all? And who's discipling you? Because that's going to be a huge influence on you as far as how you develop your theology, what's right, what's wrong, what you pursue, the things that you think are super important. All of that. And I think that's part of what it seems to be what's part of it. Like, I watched the clips of where he was on Alex Jones, and that was super weird. And then there was one that came out today. I don't know who the guy is. He's got a podcast that's behind a paywall, but they release some stuff. And some of the stuff he was saying sounded, pretty good. And then other stuff was crazy. And then I guess he was on another podcast, Tim Pool or I think is his name. He was on that podcast and he walked out of that one. It's just interesting to see that, like, he's obviously an influencer in regards to culture, and nobody knows what to how to handle that. And especially within the Christian culture, everybody with like what you said, Matt, as soon as he became a Christian, everybody's like, yes, buy the album. He's a Christian. He's on our team. And you're like, like sanctification's a real thing. Like it's going to take some time. And, you know, who knows who's around him and who's trying to influence him and who's trying to leech off of him.
Christians seem so needy for that so often.
Yeah, that affirmation.
Like we need Kanye and we need Justin Bieber. Man, wouldn't it be great if Eminem got saved? What would that do for the Christian rap scene? You know, like I remember thinking that as a kid, like hoping that my favorite bands would get saved so I could have good Christian music.
Straight up, real question. Okay, this might date me. You guys may have never. Okay, so have you heard of the band Evanescence? Evanescence?
Yeah, I actually have. Yeah.
All right, so I don't know if you remember when I was in. It was probably freshman sophomore year of college, probably. Is when they came out, and they had that really ambiguous song that took off. Like it had spiritual tones, but it didn't say Jesus.
Yep.
And it was carried in some of the local Christian bookstores. And then they did an interview. Everybody was pumped because like, yes, there's a Christian song topping the charts. And then they did an interview and they're like, no, we're not Christians. And then like every Christian bookstore ripped it from like that little kiosk that you used to play the songs on. Yeah. And then it had a big X over it, and you were like, they didn't want to sell it anymore. But yeah, it just plays into that idea. Like we were all pumped that Evanescence was singing a spiritually ambiguous song, and they're like, no, we're really not though. Yeah, because we were so hungry for that.
So I'm pretty sure they're back together again. But in the meantime, Amy Lee, she went and released a kids album, and has written a children's book. And yeah, she's a bit different. I actually think she is a believer now.
Oh, okay. There you go.
She married a guy from my college.
Okay. Well, I don't know if the whole band said they weren't. I just know that the interview happened and everything kind of crashed to the ground after that.
But I suspect that she might be. It's like the last time I saw her, and I found out she does children's album. I was kind of researching it, and I saw some interviews like Good Morning America or something. And here's Amy Lee like in a denim jumper on Good Morning America talking about her kids album, and she's got kids now, and she wrote these little kid songs for her own kids. And I mean, that's its own whole separate discussion. Like here's this woman who has found satisfaction in being a mother and having children, and she's happy and, you know, looks really healthy, and imagine that. Anyways,
Matt, you were going to say something. What were you going to?
Yeah, I was also going to say, it's also really weird when we create such stark lines between being a Christian and being in a culture, and then we strive to see those two things cross boundaries after we have established that boundaries. And I think that it's really a self-defeating thing to do, because I can look at a piece of artwork, and I know I'm like, you know, going into like classical entertainment and value and beauty and all of that, but I can look at a painting that has nothing to do explicitly with Christianity, with theology, with the Bible, whatever it may be, and I can look at it and I can see the inherent value and the beauty in that, because ultimately all truth, goodness, and beauty is God's truth, beauty, and goodness, regardless of whether it bears the title of Christian or biblical or theological or whatever it may be. Like, I don't have to take that painting and Christianize it in order to allow myself to value and appreciate it, because that's essentially to certain extents, that's a lot of I think it's some leftover Puritanism in the way that we see culture, because like one of the craziest result of a puritanical extremism is seen in the life of John Wesley and his relationship to his mother, Susanna. So Susanna came from a very, very staunch, strict Puritan background, and Charles Sr., their father, came from you might say like a loyalist Anglican, very staunch Church of England background. And so Susanna was the kind of Puritan in that if it did not explicitly have the name of Jesus tacked onto it, then it was inherently evil and she would have nothing to do with it. Even to the extent to where she would not tell her children that she loved them. And you can literally read the letter, like as a grown man, John Wesley is writing this letter to his mother, and you can see their correspondence in public domain. And he ends his letter by saying, my affections to you, my beloved mother. Well, she responds with his letter to him, chewing him out, telling him how awful it is that he would express that kind of affection and love to her, because she knew that he was trying to get her to admit that she loved her son. And she essentially says, how dare you try to get me to admit my love for anyone but my Lord? For Christ is the only one who has my love.
Holy cow.
Well, John never told her that he loved her again, because he learned his lesson. And I think that is the logical extreme of this, not just historical Puritanism, but puritanical Christianity, where you have this dividing line. And so you have the dividing line, and then the effects of that is people kind of want to keep that fence up because they think that it does have this redeeming value, but yet they want to latch on to things and say, oh, it's Christian, so since it's Christian, now I can enjoy it.
Well, for sure, with the Evanescence thing, that's exactly why we were allowed to listen to it, because they were like, oh, it's Christian, so you can listen to it. And then as soon as it wasn't, you can't no more.
We definitely could not listen to it at my Baptist college because Baptists are still puritanical and won't allow anything.
Gotcha. Well, we know that John Wesley had some repressed mommy issues apparently now. I mean, that he internalized that a little bit.
Wow. That's intense.
There's a reason that of the two women that he fell in love with, he married neither. And the woman that he did end up marrying, I think they only lived together for like less than 5 years, and then lived separately for the last 15 to 20 years of her life. He did not attend his wife's funeral, and in his personal diary, on the day that she died, the only thing written in the journal was, "My wife died today."
I mean, so you can't buy romance like that. That's a Hallmark card, my friend. That's my wife died today in a very monotone.
Yeah, you tell them when you get to heaven. Oh, hey, John. Hey, I know all about your wife, your mom. Just so you know, hundreds of years after the fact, we preserved it for all time and all mankind, and everyone on the earth could read your diary.
Sorry about that. So, wow. Okay, so I think this is a good segue. All right, let me see if I can segue this well, right? So let's take over jumping something in the way that John Wesley's mom did, and let's talk about the Matt Chandler situation at the Village Church. Let's see if because what's basically happened, just for anybody that doesn't know, about 3 months ago at this point, Matt Chandler didn't step down. He just sort of went to the side because, essentially, to sum it up as best I can, he had been confronted by a lady in the lobby that was mutual friends with somebody he knew that he had been texting. Now, they were very clear that the text that was exchanged between him and this lady was not of any sort of sexual nature or inappropriate in that manner at all. In fact, they made it really clear that his wife knew about it and her husband knew about it. But this friend of this lady apparently had seen it and found it and confronted him about whatever the nature of this was. And this is where the big mystery is, because nobody has a clue about what was in this text message other than the fact that it wasn't sexual in nature or inappropriate in that way. That's all that's been said, as far as I know, by the church. I think there's some other stuff that's been out there, but it wasn't confirmed by the church. So we're going by what the church said. So 3 months later, he came back, I think, this last Sunday and was reinstated, I guess is the word that would be used, or restored, I think is the word that was actually used. And basically said that the church, the elders had put him through a bunch of incentives, some of which apparently were some like mental health incentives because like I forget, like 10, 11 years ago, he had a brain tumor, and he alluded to in the video when he came back that they think that maybe the reason he talked in whatever way he talked in was due to his frontal lobe being compromised because he doesn't have a piece of that anymore. That's sort of what I got from it. I could be wrong, but that's what I got from it. So the speculation is on either side here is that they went full Puritan on it, right? They just went way overboard on the reaction to something that many have speculated was probably the kind of talk that you as friends have, but you don't necessarily have in public. That's sort of the speculation on one end of it. So her friend saw it, didn't understand the sort of relationship they had where they could joke around and say things, and she took it to be a little bit inappropriate. Or the other extreme of it is that there's a lot more and it's all hidden and it's all buried and it's way worse. So there's two extremes here. And so a lot of what I've seen online, let's talk about both of those, I guess. So let's talk about the Puritan part first, because I think, again, I know nothing about this. It's none of my business. I don't know. But from what I'm looking at, it sort of strikes me as that first piece, that the whole, I joke around with my friends in text, but if you saw it, you might not think of me as much as you do now, sort of tone to it. And then in order to say they did something about it, the elders went ahead and did this 3-month thing, sit him off, put him through some tests. According to his Instagram, he went like hunting, and a lot of people said he had a 3-month vacation, essentially is what a lot of people took it as by viewing his posting and whatnot. So let's talk about that. Do you think oftentimes, kind of piggybacking off this legalistic thing, and again, just so everybody knows, in case you don't know, I mean, Village Church is in Texas. It's Bible Belt territory. It's very, the area they're in, as far as I understand it, Dallas-Fort Worth is very Christianized, sort of like legalist-esque. I know Matt Chandler, at least when I used to listen to him in college, he preached against that a lot. And that sort of, for me, set the tone of that's kind of what they were dealing with and he was trying to get his people out of. So let's talk not necessarily about the Chandler situation in particular, because we don't know a lot about it. But in general, do you think churches do err on that side oftentimes and are a little too... I don't know how to say that. I don't know if you can say like a little too legalistic in this. I mean, oftentimes I guess we don't see pastors honestly disciplined enough in some regards, but in this particular instance, do you think that maybe a church that came across this maybe overstepped the bounds as far as church discipline go? Matt, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think, like I said, and I don't know all of the specifics, and honestly, I don't care to know. I mean, I do enjoy Matt Chandler, but ultimately, I mean, yeah, I've enjoyed some of his books that I've read. I've listened to some of his stuff. Like a couple of years ago, we did a men's Bible study with something that he produced. But ultimately, I mean, he's not my pastor, he's not my community. I don't have any kind of like a personal connection to him. I mean, I wish and hope the best for him, just like I would anyone and everyone else. But I can't really speak to that specific situation specifically. But I do think that in the church, we have a tendency to swallow camels and choke on gnats. And that's essentially what Jesus was calling out the religious milieu of his own day. And I think that it's so funny because for Christians, we preach so vehemently against the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Jews and the disciples, but I see the Pharisees and the disciples in myself. I see the Pharisees and the disciples in my church and in church culture in general. Like we're literally that's the Spider-Man meme where you have the 3 Spider-Men standing around and we're all pointing at each other, and it's insanity. And so I think that, and to go back to Jesus's own phrasing, we have a tendency to swallow camels, to dismiss the things that actually should be addressed, and choke on something as tiny and insignificant as a gnat. And now I'm not saying that what happened with Matt Chandler or anything else, whatever scandal it may be, big or small, is a gnat. I'm not trying to make that kind of connection, but I am just speaking in a very general way. And so I think that all too often that is what is going on, because there are plenty of major issues that just are totally left unchecked, that would actually be good if they were brought, I mean, not even necessarily to the light. A lot of these things are the elephants in the room. Like, we all know that they're here, but we're just looking in the opposite direction and telling ourselves that no, it's, there's not an elephant in this room taking up almost everything here. And so I think it's because if we were to choke on the camels, it would be really difficult, and it would take a lot of work, and it would hurt, because anything that is beneficial hurts. Like eating healthy food is difficult.
It's terrible.
Exercise is difficult. Yeah, disciplining yourself and trying to be intentional is difficult. And so we tend to stray away from those things. And so we try to make up for that by pouring the sum of our vehemency and wrath upon the simple things, because we almost get like this sadistic glee out of doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we fall. Whether or not that's what happened with Matt Chandler, I don't know.
Yeah, well, and at least it makes you feel like you're doing something, right? So it's not like, oh, I'm not doing anything. Look what I did. Look what we took care of this little thing over here. Yeah, exactly. Josh, what's up? What do you?
I will say. Oh, I'm sorry. I will say this just really quick before we move on. The major thing that I saw in the Matt Chandler situation that set me on my way and put me into a place where I felt comfortable with knowing what little I did and being okay with that, were actually the social media posts of Matt's wife. Like, when she came out on her social media and said, "This is not what you all think it is. It's not what it's being made out to be. The man that you thought my husband was yesterday is the man that he is today." And for his wife to step out and to say all of this, for me, that's what settled the situation in my mind, because ultimately that's what it comes down to. A man's commitment and a man's relationship with his wife supersedes even his pastoral relationship to a church.
Yes,
of course, his personal relationship with the Lord supersedes his relationship to his wife, but his relationship to his wife and his family far exceeds the relationship that he has to any local church body, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? The whole qualifications are you got to be able to pastor your own home before you can pastor the Lord's house. So yeah. So Josh, what do you got here? Thoughts banging around in your head?
I mean, the first one that popped in my head is that churches and pastors are in a tough spot because there's so much concern on optics, especially pastors like Matt Chandler and well-known churches like Village Church down in Texas. We don't know. I don't think we know what happened, right? We still hasn't ever come out what actually was said or anything like that, right?
No, not what was said.
So
no,
that's really, really tough. And in my mind, it begs the question of, should it have been as public? And maybe you can't help that because of the nature of who Matt is and his position. Maybe it can't be helped. But that becomes really, really tough when you pull someone out of a pulpit, out of ministry, but then you don't know why. And now people are left to fill that gap with their imaginations. And that's a really bad place to be for a pastor. That's tough. And I imagine it was really hard on Matt, right? I'm sure people thought he had a 3-month vacation, but wondering what tens of thousands of Christians are judging you for on a daily basis has got to weigh on a man. And I imagine they received DMs and messages about whatever, or, probably some sarcastic praying for you messages, which Christians are so good at. So I think, first of all, I think that's tough. And I see our own pastors go through that to a certain degree, where they have to govern their behavior in such a way to almost please everyone, because they don't want to rock the boat at church. And they want to have a good, reputation in the community. And so I think pastors in general are in a tough spot, especially today with social media and the internet and the ability for everyone to analyze what they do, especially if there's any recording of their preaching and stuff like that, where people can just go and start digging into them. I know a pastor in New York, him and his wife, they've pastored the church, 40 years, small Baptist church. And they've lived well below their means. She's usually had a job. They've saved a lot of money, and they're doing perfectly fine for themselves. Yeah, nice little plot of land, nice house, paid for, right? And so they've been really responsible financially for years. And they probably have a stack of cash in the bank, more than likely. And I used to be best friends with his son-in-law. He made a comment to his son-in-law one time. They had these old cars, they're always falling apart, always breaking down. And my buddy was like, why don't you just go get a new car? And the pastor said, well, as a matter of fact, if I wanted to, I could probably go pay cash for a brand new Jag right now. He goes, but if I did that and I paid cash for it and I didn't have a payment for it, I would get in trouble with the church, because all they see is I'm coming home with this really nice flashy car. And in their mind, that's not stewarding money well, even though for 40 years he has stewarded his money well enough that he could do that, not have any payment, not go into any debt, still be debt free, still have a retirement, right? Still have all of that. But those are the optics. And that goes right back to that root of that Puritan mindset that Americans still have today, where, well, you haven't stewarded your money very well. I'm going to go drop, whatever. I'm going to go buy an Xbox One, and I'll preach it myself. I'm going to go buy an Xbox One and a Game Pass and whatever else. But you shouldn't pay cash for that really nice car, even though you and your wife have scrimped and saved for 40 years to be in the position to be able to do something like that. And that's the situation where pastors find themselves today. It's tough.
Yeah. And that's what I was having a sort of a back and forth on Twitter with somebody, not like a fight, just a back and forth conversation. And one of the things that came up, the optics part of it, like, I think one of the, whether mega churches are good or bad is not the discussion currently, but I think one of the sort of the cracks in the foundation of mega churches is the fact that because everybody does know who Matt Chandler is, right, there is this situation where you have a very local church body situation that needs to be discussed, but you have the knowledge that this local church body situation is now going to be national news. And so the church, it wasn't really meant to work that way. Like, the idea is that obviously if it was your church down the street, if it was one of our churches, it would be handled internally. There would be a discussion. You would get up and tell the church what had happened, and you would be super transparent, or that would be the hope, at least. I mean, that's how you should do it. And the idea is that, okay, everybody would know this is what we're going to do. This is why we're doing it this way. And it would all be out there. And it just seems like part of it. And I think people, just because of scandals that have happened in the past, automatically assume bad things. And again, I don't know anything about the situation, so who knows? I mean, John's in the chat. He's saying, he knows people high up at the Village Church that say they're totally okay with how everything went down, which that's good news. But the idea is that, like, I think everybody just sort of puts this past experience on top of new ones. So the automatically assumption is that something terrible happened in here and you're hiding it. And so again, just looking at the situation, I don't think it's great optics as far as like how to do church discipline well with a pastor, because like you said, like, what happened and like, what was it done biblically?
Sure.
Was it done biblically? Like, again, none of our business, but the reality is that the Village Church knows that everybody's looking at it, and they handled it in that way probably for that reason. And so now there's other people out here going like, all right, but like, if this is that what I'm supposed to do at my local church, then just like nobody knows what happened and we just kind of go on with it, trusting that you're being honest about it. And there should be, I think there should be a level of trust in your elders that you have to say, okay, I trust that you're taking care of this well because I trust you. But there is, I think, from an elder perspective, I mean, there's churches I know. There's a church I visited maybe a year and a half ago, huge church, millions of dollars on a budget, but on their handout, on their bulletin, they actually have on the back, this is where we're at for the year. This is how much we've raised. This is where all of it's going. And I thought that was amazing. Like, it's super transparent. You have millions of dollars flowing through your building and you have on your bulletin every Sunday, like where this is going, where we're at budget wise. So as a member of the church giving, you're aware of that. Like, that's accessible to you. And I think that's something that's really helpful. And so in this situation, it was just a little odd, I think, for some people, that it wasn't like you're in this weird position because you're going, it's not my church, so I don't need to know, yet I don't know. And it's sort of like, did you handle this well? And so you are left to just trusting it and hoping that, that everything went well. And again, the conversations I've had with people is like, I would much rather you err on the side of being a little too heavy on the safety part, of just saying, okay, we're going to maybe go a little overboard here so that we have all of our bases covered so nobody can accuse us of anything, rather than saying it's just no big deal. I think it is, and I don't think it'll be used this way, but I think if it was a smaller church, it would be a really good opportunity to maybe teach on legalism or to teach on like how, so let's say, for example, that it was some sort of like a joke that you would tell your close friend, but you wouldn't tell everybody in a conversation, right? And so there is, I think, a conversation to be had there about believers and how we as believers, hold on, I'm losing audio for some reason here. How we as believers operate with one another, and like where's the decorum and what's proper and what's not. I just don't think we talk about that, and we just chalk it up to, if you say don't cuss, you're legalistic, and then if you do cuss all the time that's just an example, but the idea is if you do, then you're just being super, free grace everywhere. And we just don't have a really good balance of that.
That's why I try not to curse all the time.
Well, I mean,
I try to be real nuanced with it.
I know this may be a weird analogy to make, but just talking about this and like trying to develop decorum and balancing public life and private life without trying to create a double identity. But it comes down to the fact that I would not like burp, especially intentionally, from the pulpit in the middle of a message.
Right.
But if I'm sitting around a table with a group of my friends, like, am I going to to belch for comedic effect? I mean, yeah. And I know this is really weird, but it's like, so then is burping wrong? Should I never?
No,
burp?
That's a good example.
Because
yeah.
If it's inappropriate for the pulpit, if it's disrespectful for the house of God, then is it not also inappropriate and disrespectful elsewhere? And honestly, that is where the Pharisees went off track, because this is essentially what began the Pharisaical tradition.
Right.
They were in exile, and they had no temple, and they had lost that sense of the sacred, and so their solution was, let's make all of life sacred. Now, they started going overboard when they wanted to make every aspect of life to attain the level of holiness that was required for the priests to enter the temple. And then they went even further by trying to force it on everyone else. God, the law, Moses never said everybody has to live the way that the Levites are living. The Levites, and it never says the Levites have to live in the same way that the priests do. And in fact, a lot of the ordinances for the priests are for their rotation when they are in this specific place ministering before the Lord. And so that of course would exceed the time that we have here, but I think that we have to find that balance in what is appropriate for context and appropriate for timing, appropriate for setting, appropriate for audience, and see that as good, but also understand it in the broader perspective of life and in the way that God has laid out that life should be conducted.
No, I think yeah. Well, I think that was a good example. I mean, because there's been times before where I've been preaching and I don't use notes. I mean, I have obviously my outline, but then I kind of just go off of the knowledge that I've acquired through, and the notes is sort of a guide. And I've got to the point where I'll get up there and I'll say something like, and that's a bunch of duty. Like, I have to like recorrect my brain. And there's been times before I'm like, okay, I'm never preaching here again because I just said crap from the pulpit. And I mean, that was one of the things where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, there's definitely a different way I'm going to have that. I mean, that's not recently, but that has happened. And it's one of those things where it's just like, wow, okay, yeah, how I would have a conversation with you one-on-one, probably not how I'm going to preach through here. How I have a conversation with the total stranger is not going to how I have a conversation with a good friend. The way I talk to my buddy that I've known for 20 years is not how I'm going to talk to somebody I've known for 5, and I'm not sure how they weigh it. And I think, again, if I had to speculate, I think that's probably what happened there. And even if it isn't, I think it's a good discussion to have for the church in general to say, man, like, there are things that I think if you're going to judge pastors on how they communicate with people they know really well or how they're very open with, based on if they're able to be your pastor anymore, you're going to have to go way outside of the Bible to make that applicable, and you're going to have to take almost every pastor out of the pulpit that you have. That's just I mean,
yeah, I don't think you are going to find anyone like that.
Yeah, I
have to say I'm impressed with the village church in the sense that we don't know what happened. So everyone in leadership that was a part of that, nobody went and leaked it. Nobody went and spread their business elsewhere, and we're still here wondering, and that's good because it's not our business. So I think the best case now is Matt's back in the pulpit. The people have seen fit to restore him to ministry. We rejoice in that, and we move on and go about our lives. And I think it's neat that the leadership has put it in that position now. And I think they've set Matt up for success by not going and leaking and trying to get details and justification. They kept it in-house. I think that speaks a lot to the elders' integrity to be able to do that. Because that's pretty rare today that somebody doesn't go and slip up and say something to somebody and it lands on a post somewhere, and then Julie Royce picks it up and blows it up.
So we're not going to get to the Elon Musk thing, so that's fine. We can maybe cover that a different day. But I think the last 10 minutes that would be what we were talking about right here would be a good discussion to kind of sort of end the night a little bit, especially like the Julia Royce stuff. So as far as not her specifically, but that sort of in vein, I think we live in an age right now that there are megachurch pastors that everybody knows about, but we don't have a great concept, even a little bit of what we were talking about last week with Kiefer. Great conversation, by the way, guys. If you haven't watched last week's live, go watch that. Kiefer, I mean, great conversation. But like this idea that we don't understand very well, I think this idea of the local church and policy within the local church and church discipline within the local church, and the fact that you are supposed to have a shepherd over you, and this discipleship process is supposed to be happening, and like that is the person that God's put over you. And we really see it more of like I attend here and like that person's okay, but I preferred some rando over here that I see on the internet because they're more energetic or whatnot. And I think part of this whole situation with the village, or even with the whole MacArthur church situation, or just any, like even the Mark Driscoll thing, like all of the big name pastors that we've heard all of this stuff about, I think we can learn lots of lessons from, for sure, for our own local church. Like, all right, how do we want to do this? Have we thought about this? How would we react if this happened? I think that's good for teaching purposes. I mean, I'd assume probably like a lot of the early churches were like, hey, so Corinth is doing this thing. So if that happened here, what do we do? But also in the sense that realizing that like that essentially should be controlled in-house. I mean, we have biblical guidelines put in place to say there's a reason you have leadership and elders. There's a reason that you have the body that you have. And yes, I can learn a lot from you if, good or bad. But that's really none of my business. And I think there's a lot of stuff just because of how we have social media now. I mean, the whole reason we're even talking about it tonight, right? Like it's out there, and now everybody and their brother wants to weigh in on an opinion on what occurred, whether it was right, whether it was wrong, and if you should even associate with people anymore. I mean, especially when the MacArthur thing came out, like it was just like, why aren't you disowning him? Like there was so many Twitter ats to Shane and Shane for hosting MacArthur at their Sing conference that it was crazy. And I mean, good on them for not even entering into that conversation. But the idea is that like, there's just this big thing like, hey, this happened. What's your take on it? And it's like, well, and I'm just as guilty, by the way. I have like 6 videos about the whole MacArthur thing. Like, so that's like, I'm just as in the fray on this as everybody else. But I think through that, I've really looked and been like, all right, wow. Like a lot of conversations I had from that were like, is this even really any of my business? Like all the conversations I kept coming to at the end of it was like, yeah, but this isn't my church though. Like I can learn a lot from this. Like I can learn how we should react to stuff, but this isn't my church. So, I mean, do you think net good or net negative in the situation we're in right now with the Big C church and the access we have to all the information we have?
I think that as wonderful as the benefits of it are, the possibility for abuse is just as great. And so I think that's what I think that's what we're dealing with. The kind of connectivity and access to information and access to interpersonal connections where even, the 3 of us in 3 totally different parts of the country are broadcasting live to people from who knows where who are watching, and is going to be posted on YouTube for perpetuity for who knows where to come and watch this video. I think that is the potential for really good growth, for really good resource and challenge and all of that. But at the same time, it can also be just as detrimental.
Yeah. I was there for a minute. I was like, oh no, he's going to say it's a net negative. I'm going to have to delete this whole video.
I had a conversation with a friend years ago. He's a little bit older than I am. We were talking about sin and human history and whatnot. And I was saying something along the lines that it seems like we're more sinful now than we were in the past. That was just kind of my take then on it. And he said, well, Josh, I don't know if that's the case. He goes, I think what you could say is that we're more efficient with sin than we have been in the past. We're better at it. So these issues of dealing with churches and mega churches and Phariseeism and gossip and things that aren't necessarily our business, it existed 2,000 years ago, but it took a long time to take a reed to papyrus, scratch that out, handwrite 10 copies over the course of a year.
You're sitting there going, is this even worth it? I don't even think this is worth it.
So they could hook it by foot to the next city, right? As opposed to in an instant now, like how many thousands of miles are we separated talking in an instant over live video, about these things. And let's assume for a second that what we were doing is wrong, right? We're more efficient in whatever it is that we would hypothetically be sinning in than we were years ago. And so technology has this ability of amplifying humanity, either for the good or for the bad. So we can amplify the good in that, the Bible exists, it's out there, it's digital, it's never going away, you can't get rid of it. But we can also amplify the bad, and it can make our sin worse, in a sense, right? It makes it more efficient, more accessible to everybody. And I think we see all of that on the internet too. Like it takes 3 seconds to think of good and bad examples. And that's what technology does. It makes things more efficient, good or bad.
Yeah. No, totally. I thought about that today. I thought, because that conversation comes up a lot. Like sinning, are we better, or is it more like, is it worse now than it was before? And that's the conclusion I've come to. Same as you. I'm like, no, it's no worse. It's just easier to do now. Like you have technology that allow. So I mean, back in Paul's day, you'd have to go to a temple to go to a prostitute. Now you can just get on the internet. Like it's no effort at all.
Right.
And it's one of those things where. A little bit on the Elon thing, not a lot. And really on the Elon thing, it's more of the Twitter thing. I saw a thread, I forget who it was from, but basically what was being said was that, what was it? I think it was a Lutheran, one of the Lutheran denominations was talking about pastoral qualifications, your online presence, like that's going to be held into account in that regard. Like which it should always be for everyone anyway, but they made a point of reference to say, this is something we're going to look at. So I think that's a net positive in regards to saying like, you can't just be a jerk on the internet and disqualify yourself, even if everything else in real life is fine. And this idea of like what you say, how you interact with people, all of that has to fit into your pastoral qualifications as well. So again, have to be thought of well by outsiders, have to be not quarrelsome, like all of these things that you would be expected to do in real life. They're making a point to make sure that like, yeah, we're going to check your Twitter feed. Yeah, we're going to check all of these things we're going to look at to ensure that you're being a faithful shepherd, not only in your actual pastorate, but online to total strangers that know that you are a pastor. And I think that's where I think a lot of people fall into. I got to check over the almost 10 years of doing this account, there's been a ton of growth for me to where I would easily shoot off a reply 6-7 years ago that I really triple think twice about now. I'm like, is this worth it? Because if I jump into this comment for whatever reason, everybody else on this thread thinks they can do it now too. Like no one said anything, but now that I've said something, I've opened the door for it. And so it's one of those things where I think it's one of those things that not just pastors, but I think Christians in general, we really need to think about that, especially when it's so easy to shoot off some hot take really quick and not consider, if it falls in line with the fruits of the Spirit in your Christian witness, just because you're mad or because something doesn't you don't like what's being said. And so, yeah, on the, we hit Twitter a little bit there, but I think, for sure that, I think every denomination should do that. I think that's incredibly helpful. But anyway, last words, anything on what we've talked about, guys?
So I just have a question that we can't answer in time. We'll have to talk about it another time.
Okay.
But along with what you were saying for pastors, for everyday lay people in the congregation, does the church have a say over what we say and post on social media? In particular, if it's stuff that goes in direct violation against the church's statement of faith or covenant or things like that, right? So if I were to go out and start spouting heresy or take a pro-choice position on something, which my church is not pro-choice, something like that, do my pastors have the authority to rein me back in and say, Josh, you shouldn't be saying that on Facebook and you should probably go delete it? I don't know.
Interesting.
Hey, time to answer that now.
No, but that's a good topic for another night for sure.
Right.
Maybe even next week. Yeah.
Right. We want to err on the side of freedom of speech and all of that, right? But how much of that plays into us being under the authority of a church? We've agreed with the statement of faith, right? We've come in, we're part of a covenant. There are standards there of behavior and speech. Where do we draw the line on that? So
yeah, no, good topic. We could tie that all into church membership and all that as well. Matt, anything before we head out?
No, I just hate that we didn't get to the part where I got to actively try on the Neuralink, and like describe it to you guys. We discussed Elon Musk. So I guess I'll just have to wait for another.
Yeah, we'll combine Elon Musk. Well, yeah, that's what we'll do. We'll combine Elon Musk, AI, and church membership, and attending church in the metaverse with your what was it? Your Neuralink.
Neuralink.
Yeah, and transhumanism.
I'm just telling you right now.
Transhumanism stuff's weird, man.
I'm just telling you right now. Weird. You try to put something in my brain, just forget off me now. I'm not doing it, guy. I'm not. I can't even put contacts in my eyes. You think you're gonna drill something into my head? You are way, way on a different planet. I'm not. No. Forget that nonsense. Okay, guys, if you appreciated this conversation, make sure you go ahead and like the video, comment on the video. I'm sure we said something you didn't like or you did like. Let us know so that we can either have that dopamine hit or curl up in a ball in the corner. I need to know which way to go with this, so I'm going to need you to comment, like, or share this. And next week, we'll come back again with another topic, probably Josh's, so be prepared to have your input on that. We'll talk to you then. See you later.